I think there's three components of this, and I'm shamelessly stealing this from somebody who's way smarter than I am. I think there's storytelling. You've got to inspire people, and you've got to set that vision.
I love it.
And
I love it.
if you are able to do those three things, you can get people on board, you can get them excited, and they'll want to change. They'll want that thing to happen, and they'll want you to be successful. And I think it's those three things that really you should start with for anything that you're trying to gather buy-in for the
Yeah, I
change of
had
the
someone
organization.
come to me and say, I am so busy, Brian. I don't have time to enter tickets into the system. This I know is not upscale, but this is just a personal, what they're doing every year, right?
Eventually, you will be so busy you don't even have time to do what you're doing
Yeah.
now.
Welcome back to the Wired Garage with Pops. I have heard you in a recent conversation saying scale creates noise and anything not enforced via automated governance and type process falls apart. Can you start off with just what did you mean by it?
So think about it if you are creating a sandwich for yourself. You get the bread, you know where the peanut butter is, the jelly, the utensils. Real simple. Well, now say you're making peanut butter and jelly sandwiches for a party, couple friends, a party, and then a wedding. The tools and the approach is not the same. If you want to do it in a reasonable amount of time, you have to have a different approach in order to scale. And in terms of noise, noise can come from all different places, all different forms. And having drive-bys, emails, Slack notifications, if you are in the office and you are sitting by another team, you may get physical drive-bys as well. And once you start stacking all of that up, think of the peanut butter and jelly example as a process. So managing incidents, managing changes. The faster that those come at you, the more automated and the tighter governance you need in order for those processes to be successful and not fall apart. Eventually, you can get overwhelmed and you've got to go back to the drawing board. So I think that would be a topic that I would want to focus on tonight. But I think it's been something kind of more at the forefront, especially with AI and MCP and all these new technologies coming out. They're really testing our processes and they're testing
Mhm.
our ability to scale.
Well, I think like you and I discussed earlier, off the recording, is it challenges the long haired silos.
Hmm.
The thing, the teams that and process that people build for a long time, right? And it stood true for so long. But when you take that process, which it probably has some value, but it probably has a lot of holes in it, but it protects itself. When you mix it with other process that link and interject and with it,
Hmm.
you're destroying some of this stuff, and people get protective. People get scared and nervous about what they're doing tomorrow. They're not comfortable anymore. So describe some of these barriers that these organizations will face when they try to automate and they bring these processes in at scale. Tell me some of the barriers you think organizations might face.
So I think I'll start with the people barrier. I think there's a readiness aspect, uh, it a readiness aspect to automation, to technology, to processes. And the thinking that got you where you are is not going to be the thinking that is going to get you to where you're trying to go. And from a people perspective, from an organization perspective, are you ready to think differently? Are you ready to do things differently? Can you do things differently? And I think those are questions that the organization needs to think through, needs to come to agreement or create some kind of alignment or buy-in to drive that readiness and figure out if the organization is ready or if now is not the right time.
Yeah, staying on the people side before you move on to the other two. I mean, that you're changing people's lives. You're changing people's what they do
You're
every day.
moving the cheese.
You're moving the cheese. All their comfort is sort of adjusting. Thing is, you I always kind of described it that you can only carry so much of a load. By our future automations and things like that is we're going to take some of those things that don't need to be carried anymore so you can carry more. I mean, every day our business moves forward. Our technology has to move forward with those businesses that we work for. They're our clients. That's who we're supporting. And we have to then do new things. Well, if always carrying past loads and never offloading it, never transitioning it to something that can be automated or gotten rid of, at some point, I'm going to be buried. And it's inevitable.
Yes, you are eventually going to be overwhelmed with enough of those small little manual processes or that tech debt that never went away until eventually that consumes your time. And if we don't automate, if we don't address the technical debt, if we don't change our thinking, and I think that is what is most critical, is aligning the process for long-term success and for scaled success. It's not trying to say, hey, I made the peanut butter and jelly sandwich today. I was able to close the incident today. Cool. What about the 50 you need to do tomorrow? Or maybe it's not incidents, maybe it's changes, but now you need to also track a new regulation that is spun up out
Mhm.
of the EU, for example. And now you have more and more requirements. And I think when requirements keep growing, tech debt keeps going, it's hard to stay agile, it's hard to adapt, it's hard to scale.
Okay, now tell me about, I don't know which one you want to go into next. The technology of the triad,
Mhm.
the technology of the process. Pick one and go down that road. What's a barrier that an organization face in one of those areas?
On the technology side, automating a process that's not fit for scale. That is certainly a big one. If you've got a process that came from email, it came up from a spreadsheet, and it's lightly automated, it was more of a lift and shift. That process really wasn't redesigned and probably isn't meant for what you're trying to. I'll just use an example. ServiceNow as an example. If you took a process out of email, you put it into ServiceNow, did you look at any of the capabilities that the tool provides? Are you familiar with the capabilities? Are you familiar with the practice? If it's compliance, if it's security operations, are you familiar enough with those and how it works on whatever your tool of choice is that the process that you moved over makes sense? Or should you reinvent that process so that it can handle and achieve what you're trying to accomplish? And kind of being focused on those outcomes instead of just trying to throw automation at a problem before the problem is really well defined. I think that is a big one. It can get us over and over and over again. And it's getting out of that, well, we've always done it this way mentality.
Mhm. It's like the evolution of the onboarding or offboarding for workflows, right? It used to
Mhm.
be checklists that maybe HR had, IT had, and they would always battle like, do you have this done yet? No, I don't. Do you have an email yet? Nope. We haven't even got the user ID set up yet. Just all those. And then you got to where you're using these onboarding and offboarding automated workflows, but all they're doing is dumping tasks and creating a task to manually still do everything. But now
Yeah.
you just have a task. Okay, so now I know who's assigned or what's out there to be done and what isn't done yet, but I still haven't taken any load off of anybody.
Yeah.
I'm just like you said, we're just shifting things and that's it. Then you start automating where it creates the ID for you or it collects the license back on an offboarding. You turn in your laptop, you remove them from you move them into another part of the AD tree, right? And then it should collect the software licenses back so you can reuse them for somebody else. All those
Mhm.
things can be automated, and all those emails complaining about, okay, I don't have any licenses. Can you free some up? Go away. and all that's now you're relieving tasks. It's the same thing, right? I think you
And
gotta be ready for that.
the example that you just used there, I love that example. It's not strictly an HR example. It's not strictly an IT example. That automation there is not just in one silo. It's across multiple departments. It's cross departmental. And in order to get there, you've got to have a holistic understanding of that process. You've got to see all the different touch points, who are the key players that are involved, and then figure out, okay, how can we approach this differently? Do we have to do it this way? And I think the example that you use is just a perfect example of how to rethink the process so that you can truly leverage what automation capabilities there are out there today, regardless of tool. And then I think what kind of touched upon it a little bit would be process then. So process, what kind of process barriers do you think of for an organization?
I think everybody's kidding themselves with some of the larger processes like an onboarding, offboarding, a lot of them, a purchase, things like that. They're kidding themselves if they think they're going to come out with the best process right out the bat, because you have to touch, like you said, the people. There's different people, different departments, different ways of doing things. Maybe not as technically literate as you are. Maybe they're busy doing a lot of other things. That's just a part of their job. I mean, there's a lot of things you got to worry about and think about. And I think it has to be something that you say, this is going to evolve. I'm going to get this out there where we know we're going to have issues. Everyone should know, and we're going to evolve this process and continually improve it forever, forever. Because technologies change, what we do changes, the people involved change, etc.
And I think that's part of continuous improvement. And there's frameworks that drive some of that, which we'll get to. Treating your processes like software or the business value that it generates, not documenting it, not having an understanding of the integrations or the touch points. I think the roles and responsibilities are a big one too. Our roles and responsibilities for that process documented? Is there a business process diagram somewhere? And when,
What's that called? The RACI chart?
yeah, a RACI. Some RACIs, so you have RACI, and then you have RACSI, I think, and the S for that one is supported. So you might have a team that actually
There you go.
supports.
That's great.
Yeah. And automation, cool. People, important. Where the rubber meets the road is the process. So day in, day out, how effective is that process? What is the health of that process? Are you managing the health of that process such that you know that the process is fit for purpose and your organization is getting the utility out of it that it should? And I think process is not as glitz and glam as technology. And so we think, "Oh, how can we solve this process? Like the process is a problem with technology." But really, we should be thinking, how can we engineer this process so that we are optimizing the technology? We are optimizing our people.
This reminds me, I'm aging myself a little bit, but in the few law firms I've worked for, time and billing, the accounting department was trying to track billing memos or for narrative updates and things like that. And it was always losing the paperwork on the attorney's desks. If you imagine these attorneys, they have, back then, red wells and paper all over the place.
Hmm.
Well, they went to, here's what the innovation was: yellow sheets. They were all yellow. So they can see if there's something yellow, more than likely, that's what they were looking for. And then they got into, wow, that works so well. We're going to do this other thing in blue sheets. It was still printing paper. It was still going through, but they could find it easier. When the professional assistant, the secretaries, the legal assistants come in looking for that, a lot easier to find. It was
Yeah.
quicker. They saved time, but you didn't really adjust the process much, but you made it easier to find the holdups and things. I just find it funny. Just going through when I go through process design, I always think
Hmm.
of that story just of, okay, are we really moving it or are we just shifting and we're still doing
Yeah.
just as much work and we really didn't accomplish anything?
And so I think tying the bow on that one, if you have some way to manage and measure the health of your process, you're probably moving in the right direction.
I agree. I agree. So what advice would you give organizations just beginning to scale their IT ops? Is there any kind of governance automation you would advice you'd give?
That
Given
is
some of these
a
projects you've been in lately, what advice would you give?
that is a great question. I think focusing on the having very detailed requirements, being very clear on how each of these things are going to be governed, what the cadence of that is, and how you make changes to that. The governance isn't working, if a process isn't working, if somebody has an idea, what's the intake mechanism for that? How does it go through process? How does that get approved? Who does it have to go through? And how can we limit the manual touch points as much as possible for those
Yeah.
process improvements? Think about that for a
Especially
second.
ones
Just
that
begin
go
to
to
scale.
individuals instead of groups, right? I mean, those processes that go to an individual always cause problems because, they get busy, they're out, they're vacation, they're sick, they're taking their kid to something. That process that goes to an individual, you should never have nothing go to an individual. I don't care if there's only one individual in the group, still
Right.
it's somewhere, just get it to a group. That's one thing. And I think
Think of
if your risk register or whatever it is, if if you feel like, okay, we only have 3 or 4 risks, you're kidding yourself. You need to go deep, deep, deep and a long list of risks because people who have been in a job for a long time, they're a risk because they're going to be more than likely, and not always, there's some people who will move, but a lot of times they're going to be the ones who drag your feet. So you got to watch that. Think through your risk list. You need to really think through that. And it can't be Santa's list. It's got to be something thick, deep. It may even hurt people's feelings that they're even on that list. But I think to know it's out there publicly for everyone to see, it'll help.
I think here I'll use a couple examples. So from a governance perspective, having something like a technical governance board is helpful to be able to review, hey, we're making this change. Should we make this change? Is there an alternative? Do we have other solutions instead of making this change that we're about to make? And from that perspective, you've got risk. So you have the risk about a change. You probably have a cab of some sort, a change advisory board, several different groups to look at these things. And there's certainly something there's probably some saying somewhere about not automating all your governance. You want a technical governance board, you want a cab, you want somebody to be accountable reviewing these things. I think when you are trying to scale, where you might be able to kind of draw a line where it makes sense and then figure out, kind of right size it, is on assessments. So what you want to do, but very last resort is get something in front of people that truly have to review it. What you can do before then is have a risk assessment. You can have a change assessment. Have the folks who are knowledgeable about what is happening or what is changing in the organization to provide as much information as they can up front. And you can have business logic behind the scenes, kind of ranking, is it small, medium, high on risk in terms of effort? Is it low, medium, or high? Get as much information front loaded as possible, put that through your business rules to figure out, kind of rank it, risk it. And then once all that information is there, if it's still got to go up for that manual review, now you have powered your team to have that information enabled, that team to have that information up front. Ideally spending no more, even if it's decently complex, no more than about 5 minutes, I would say, on that topic. And if they don't have enough information to approve it in that meeting, then there wasn't enough information collected or
Right.
provided. And I would push back on that and have them go back and do the digging to collect and provide that before you have that meeting. You want to have a follow up as an exception and not the rule.
So I think we talked about this. We covered this question, but like I think how do manual processes typically fail when you increase in scale? What are the signs that they're falling apart? I think we kind of talked about that, but I think I'd like to accentuate that a little bit just to remind people about manual processes. Just make sure if they're listening to one part of our episode that they catch this piece of it, that these manual pieces, how they fail, and maybe how they're valuable. Maybe they're valuable. There's some parts of it that are valuable. You really don't want, like you said, everything automated, but
Yeah, so when you have manual processes, you have to follow up on those. You have to be diligent. You've probably have some manual validation or some automated business logic that's validating. I use air quotes, these processes. I think where they fail is say that person who created that process or was a SME in that process moves. They retire, they win the lottery. Is that process documented? Do we know how to govern it? Does it still make sense in the landscape of today's organization? Is it really tech debt disguised as a process?
Mhm.
I think there's a lot of things I would love to do with my time during the day when I'm working. Manual processes, typically not it. So I think in addition to the points that we covered there, it kind of goes back to people, process, technology, and just reviewing that process, making sure it's fit for purpose. Is it still providing the utility? Then is it healthy? Are you still able to effectively manage that process with the tools that are available? I don't know if you would want to add anything to that.
Well, I
Close
think
that one out.
I think that's good.
Okay.
How do you communicate this upward? How do you get that buy-in for the investment of money, purchasing, time, noise? You're creating noise in the environment, OCM's noise in the environment. How do you communicate the value of what you're trying to deliver to those stakeholders?
I think there's three components of this, and I'm shamelessly stealing this from somebody who's way smarter than I am. I think there's storytelling. You've got to inspire people and you've got to set the vision.
I love it.
And
I love it.
if you are able to do those three things, you can get people on board, you can get them excited, and they'll want to change. They'll want that thing to happen and they'll want you to be successful. And I think it's those three things that really you should start with for anything that you're trying to gather buy-in for the
Yeah, I
change of
had
the
someone
organization.
come to me and say, I am so busy, Brian. I don't have time to enter tickets into the system. This I know is not upscale, but this is just a personal, what they're doing every year, right?
Eventually, you will be so busy, you don't even have time to do what you're doing
Yeah.
now.
There's something like, that's why you're busy, right? Is you're not getting it in there. You're
Yeah,
you're doing all, but they said that what they want to do is, I want to quickly email it, and can you have a inbound mail action so it goes right to me? It's that roundabout. And what I didn't want to do, I mean, I'm sitting there, we're actually at the bar and I got to get together, and I'm weighing some of my response. And I said, okay, here's my deal. I'll give into that process. I don't believe in it. I'll give into that process because it sounds like I'm not giving you that in some other way that's better. I don't have a better alternative for you. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to build a mobile interface for you that is quicker than sending an email. And really, that's the only argument he cannot argue back to me. That's the quickest way right now is to send an email. Everything else is too slow. If I say that I can bring him an interface on a mobile device that is quicker than sending an email, he can't argue with it. And if I deliver to that, think of how many people are going to be happy saying, oh my gosh, entering tickets is so easy. When I'm walking down the hallway, people are catching me. I can enter it real quick.
yeah,
It's a lot easier, and it's a lot easier than email. Email doesn't always capture categories all the time correctly. A predictive intelligence works, but not always perfect. But they can do this in there quickly. 4 or 5 fields, boom, it's in
mhm,
there.
yep.
That's my goal then. I go to the development team and say, that's our goal.
And that's a perfect example. So what you did, you had storytelling, you were inspiring, and you are setting that vision not just for the customer of what could be possible. You're also then sharing that vision with the team so that they can go drive and make that thing a reality. And then that just ends up being a success story because now you're taking what was unstructured data in a manual process that then had to be further manually addressed into a very structured process where now if you have to improve the health of that process, if you have to scale that process, you have options and you can do that. And it's not just available at your computer now you've got it on mobile too.
That's right.
And so I think that is example right there of those three things. There is always going to be the argument of I'm too busy. And I think it's just breaking down why, what is going on, how can we do it better, and let's assess what tools are in our toolbox and figure out this problem. There's got to be a solution that's better than I'll send an email.
Everything's battling time. And when you and I worked together years ago, a lot of things we did was instead of making them do something more, how can we create a trail of breadcrumbs that we gather behind
Mhm.
them and let them move naturally? And then we'll pick up the metadata we need from that as much as we can. Anytime you ask them to do more, everyone's overwhelmed, everyone's overworked, no one's hiring enough, in their minds. So time and ease and confidence is all I got to deliver. So anyway, that was my reaction to him was just how do I got, I got to move him. And
Mhm.
but I can't go to him and say no, you're not doing that because that's what everybody else told him. You can't just send him out. It doesn't work that way. That's ineffective. Well, I'll do it. If I can't beat it, I'll let you
Mhm.
do what you want to do.
That's awesome. I think there's empathy there as well,
Oh,
and
you have
I
to have
think
empathy. You
yeah.
have to. It's not the same world we had in 1980s, which you're too young to live through. But I mean, back then, the tech geek was a tech geek, and he knew everything, and what he says went. He didn't understand enough to know to argue with him. And
Mhm.
now with what they call it, the simple, what is it, the easy button?
Yeah.
I hated that when the thing came out. 'Cause everyone would talk about that, but the easy button and truly technology is easy. It's at everyone's fingertip. We have more computing power in our hands than we used to have in data centers.
Raspberry Pis are insane. It's crazy. They're full size computer in your pocket. It's crazy.
I remember 10 megabyte hard drives were 4 or 5 inches tall and they were used as door stops when they weren't usable anymore and the platters were usable. I mean, they were that heavy and that huge. I mean,
There there
it's
there was a
incredible.
There was a story that a ex-Microsoft engineer, uh, just bought this, I can't remember exactly what it was. It had 655 megabytes of storage, and it was from, like, 85 or 87, somewhere around there. It's 200 pounds.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
I remember selling them damn things. And I used to use one as a doorstop, one that had broken platters and it wasn't usable anymore. It was a doorstop. I mean, or it kept the door open. I mean, anyway, that's a side thing. All right, tell me about tools. What tools can we use for this? For a large scale project, let's talk about just project, not about anything like automations of tooling or services. Let's talk about
So,
managing the project. What tools you think?
tooling wise, there's a bunch of different tools out there on the market in terms of what you can use to manage a project. The extra consideration that I would have is what additional value do you get if you pick one tool versus another because of what is attached to that tool or already inside of that tool. I'll give you an example. So if you do your project management in, I'm going to say smart sheets, for example, is that tied to your resource management? Do you have rate cards in there? Do you know how many hours you're going to be able to allocate a programmer to a project or a program inside there? Have you built that infrastructure to do your project management? Or is there another tool that you have that capability built in? Will you need that capability? You might not be on the scale where that even matters, in which case using an overly complex project management tool is not really going to serve you versus being able to be agile and quick because you don't need that level of detail. You don't need that level of information. Vice versa, if you have a really complex, challenging program with multiple work streams, stakeholders across the country, probably using Excel is not going to do it for you.
So I think I liked you when you said agile because a lot of projects I've been in 30 some years, the thing that beat me whenever we got beaten by it, it wasn't the project itself. It was an unrelated business interruption that caused us to derail. Let's an outage. Nowadays, it's a security incident, right? That makes you stop, redirect resources for a while to that. And then how do you get back on the board again and get your resources gathered back again to
Yep.
continue your project and not let it just water down your project to where you kind of just give in at some point and say, well, it's sort of done. We'll do a phase two, right? So I think that's one thing is you got to be aware of other things going on in your environment and not just protect, but sort of be resilient and agile enough to let things be, but then grab them back. Elastic, I guess you would call
In that example, and we don't have to go too far down that very real example, I think it's a great one. Your tooling, you've got to call out your risks. You've got to help educate your stakeholders and share with your stakeholders. If you don't share with your stakeholders, it's really hard to educate them. Hey, this program has been impacted by this incident or this issue. We have this risk. This risk is accepted, it is realized, it is happening, and this is how it is impacted. Here's how you can mitigate. You can either do option A, option B, option C, where one of those options is you do nothing, you handle the issue, some kind of staff aug, etc. A couple different issue options. But if you did call out the risk, call out the mitigation, and then just highlight to the stakeholder, here's what the implications of this is. So hopefully then kind of thinking through that. So just based off of that example right there, does your project management tool manage risks? Is there a RIDAC? Risks, issues, actions, decisions, change. Um, are you able to, is it meant and capable of handling programs? Does it tie into project change requests? Do you need something that has project change requests? And I think if you start thinking through, well, what are the outcomes that I'm trying to achieve when I create and manage a project? And then what are all the complexities in that project that I'm likely to face? Probably helps you determine how mature or complex that tooling needs to be, and then how much of that tool to use. So I think there's a lot of different tools that are capable of doing the job. What makes the most sense for the organization? What has that data kind of in the peripheral that you could leverage to run a better project or run a better program? Maybe it ties into your agile development tool. Lots of different possibilities there. I don't know if there's anything that you would add to that. Maybe it's not tooling, maybe it is process like Scrum or Kanban or different frameworks.
Yeah, I like looking at like ITSM, ITIL, things like that as well, just to follow best practices, frameworks that are out
Hmm.
there for protections and flows. Like you mentioned, problem and change and how that all flows to a release and things like that. But I think you're right. I think you have to look at a big picture. I think you can't be in the trenches during this. You have to get up out of the trenches, look across the field and see exactly where you're going and where your impediments or where your caverns and crossings are and dangers are so that you can maneuver through this pretty well.
And just to tie the bow on it, it's not just the technology or the tool piece to it. It is also process. We get back,
Process technology,
yes, yes.
always.
And sometimes it's not a tool failing. Oh, the technology didn't allow me to see my risks. We had no process for risks. And so there's kind of those three pieces of that pyramid, people, process, technology, for any of these things that can kind of help inform which direction you should go, what approach you should take, what frameworks are going to be the most beneficial, and then are our processes ready or mature enough for what we're trying to accomplish. I like that full circle. That's what I call a closed loop process.
Well, I think you closed the session. I think this episode's done.
Awesome.
I think you just went full circle and you closed it up. I
Awesome.
want to thank everybody for joining us. Good discussion here. If anybody sees anything they want us to expand upon or want to join in a call, let me know and reach out to us online. Thank you again for joining the Wired Garage.
Cheers.